This is a numeric question.
That's right.
And so you have to look at the different sectors, like power generation, transport, industrial use, and say to yourself, what is possible? Other than Daniel Yergin, the best writer in the energy space is Václav Smil. And he has at least a dozen books that are worth reading, but two that are pretty succinct and I highly recommend are Energy Myths and Realities and Energy Transitions. And they both are economic and numeric on the issue of how hard it is, how long it is, how difficult it is to change our energy system. So if you take any one of these sectors, let's just take electric generation, the designs we know today are what we will permit and build for the next 20 years. And those plants will last, the lowest lifetime of any plant, even a natural gas peaker, is about 30 years. And so the notion that that sector, and the same logic applies to the other one, the notion that that sector will be 50% non-hydrocarbon in 50 years, it's not possible. It's not going to happen.
So not even in 50 years?
No.
So you're going further out than even Dan Yergin went. When do you think we could get to global consumption 50% or less?
I think the two basic views I have. One is that people underestimate how hard it is to make these changes. That is, they look at intermittent energy sources, they don't think about storage and transmission. They look at things that are deeply subsidized and they forget that they are deeply subsidized. They look just at the rich world and they don't look at where all the energy increase is taking place, which is in middle and low income areas. So I think the problem is way harder than many observers think. I'm on the Smil camp on this. But I also think, to counterbalance that a little bit, and here I very much agree with Vinod, that the potential for innovation, not innovation in the next 10 years, because you got to invent during this next 10 years, but innovations that will start to be rolled out in the, say, 20-year time frame, means that we can be, in terms of the first derivative, in terms of the rate of change, we can be pretty dramatic. And so if you took a period like 75 years, if we really fund basic research at a reasonable level, which the US does not, other countries do not, if we have policies to encourage experimentation, which, just take any one of the things, nuclear, carbon capture, we're not doing a good job on that, transmission, storage. If you do the right things, there is a chance to meet very aggressive goals in a 75-year time.
You're talking about 75 years and beyond to get under 50% on your way to zero.
Well, you can get the first derivative to be such that you can get way below 50%, because the power plants you build between now and, say, 2025, you will be in a position to start replacing those in the 2060 timeframe. So if you were hardcore, and you could get to the point, because of the economics, where you would actually end-of-life things maybe a decade soon, and you made sure that all new builds were zero CO2 emission. That is, whatever the winning technology is. So I do think you can get, I think people underestimate what can be done in the near term because of this installed base phenomena. You can get the new plants to change 30 years from now. But certainly, by 2050,
they overestimate what can be done in the near term.
If we do a good job in innovation, we could have all the new plants in rich world be zero CO2 emission. But you'd need more time before you get to 50% of that installed base.
So you've said there are 5 miracles that we need to make this happen. Can you talk about those 5?
No, we don't need 5. We need one of the 5.
Just one?
Well, we need, some of these are combo things. So if you just take
Go through the 5.
Yeah, let's just take carbon capture. If supplies of natural gas continue to expand and drilling technology, understanding geology through digital techniques keep getting better, all you need to do is put carbon capture on that and be willing to pay for it. It's expensive to capture from the flue. There's a bit of expense for storage. You have to have the regulatory who takes long-term liability, which essentially has to be governments, but that hasn't been done. So you can imagine a future where you're just using a lot of natural gas and you're able to do the capture, extremely good capture, like 95% capture, which needs some innovation. 70, 80% capture, we understand it's too expensive and that's not a high enough percentage. So that miracle alone would get you a long ways because the planet has a lot of coal and a lot of natural gas. The next miracle, these are ores so far, is nuclear energy. Not particularly popular right now in Japan and Germany and and never been that popular. Even France, the French public is more negative towards nuclear energy than the U.S. public. So it's
Even though they're what, 70%
of electricity. We have more nuclear plants than they do. We have over 100 nuclear plants of the 400 in the world. So we are the biggest in absolute nuclear electricity generator. But
you were personally investing in nuclear.
right, so the plants that are out in the world today are basically generation 1 and 2 plants. There's a few generation 3 plants, including at the conference, Westinghouse, Toshiba talked about the AP1000, which is a Gen 3 plant. That and the Areva EPR are the 2 Gen 3 plants. I think you can build a lot of AP1000s, and I think partly because what the Chinese are doing, that has by far the inside track, a lot of those can get built so that, Chinese have this goal of 80 gigawatts. Assuming there's no more accidents, that actually can be done. Unfortunately, because their demand increase is so great, it only gets you up to, at most, say, 12%, best case of Chinese energy. The thing I'm investing in, and not because I expect to make a ton of money on it, it's because because it's zero CO2, because the economics are so good, is a 4th generation design. And there are many 4th generation designs. This one is very, very attractive from an economic point of view. I mean, way cheaper than today's nuclear power.
We had Nathan Myhrvold here last year, but can you explain a little bit about how this technology works?
Okay, basically...
You're just among friends here.
Yeah, absolutely. The part of uranium that's fissile, that is that when you hit it with a neutron, it splits in 2, is about 0.7%. And when you break a uranium atom in 2, you get 1,000,000 times as much energy as you do from burning a carbon molecule. So you think, wow, this is good technology. It's 1,000,000 times better. Now you have to take that factor of 1,000,000 advantage and say, oh, crumb, that stuff that it splits into, that's radioactive. That's cesium, some bad stuff. Some short half-lives that means it's intensely radioactive, some long half-lives that means that it's around for a long time. So basically, the reactors we have today are burning that 0.7%. And that works fairly well. There was a concept a long time ago that you would do a different type of reactor called a fast reactor that would make a bunch of another element called plutonium. And then you would pull that out, and then you would burn that. That's called breeding in a fast reactor. That is bad because plutonium's nuclear weapons material, it's messy. The processing you have to get through is not only environmentally difficult, it's extremely expensive. The concept of this so-called TerraPower reactor is that in the same reactor, you both burn and breed. And so instead of making plutonium and then extracting it, we take uranium, the part that the 99.3% that you normally don't do anything with, we convert that and we burn it. So it's like a candle. A candle wax doesn't burn at room temperature. It's the flame converts it to be a liquid and that burns. So this is just like a candle. Our flame is taking the normal depleted uranium, the 99.3% that's cheap as heck, and there's a pile of it sitting in Paducah, Kentucky, that's enough to power the United States for hundreds and hundreds of years. You're taking that and you're converting it to plutonium, and then you're burning that. And we have super high power densities. We have total fail-safe. Any reactor that a human has to do something, that's a little scary.
What's the scale? Is scale important here, or is it the same scale?
The TerraPower reactor, the current design is about the same scale. That is, typically it's somewhere around a gigawatt type design. Because of the surface to volume ratio things, the first design we're doing doesn't scale down very well. Now we have another design that works for the smaller type, the more like 100 megawatt, 200 megawatt design. But our first design, which on paper really works well. And one thing to point out is that digital simulation, and this applies to all these energy technologies, the ability to digitally simulate things is night and day different than in the past. So when they built, say, the reactor at Fukushima, their ability to simulate things was very limited. They wouldn't really know. We take our reactor, we have magnitude 10 earthquakes, we have volcanoes blow over, we have tidal waves passing by, and we look and we say, oh, okay, let's put some more concrete in. You can understand what's going to happen digitally in a way that you never could before. And so the idea of full passive safety, Gen 3 takes us to much, much, much better passive safety, not full passive safety. Gen 4, whoever's Gen 4 gets built, will be a no human required, no zirconium turning into hydrogen to explode type design.
Timetable for TerraPower?
Okay, this is really fast. You're going to be amazed. By 2022, if everything goes perfectly, our demo reactor will be in place. And by 2028, again, assuming everything continues to go perfectly, it will be a design that could be replicated and built in many, many, many places. You could build at that point, because you have no fuel constraint, and according to me, you have extremely good economics, good safety, no proliferation, no waste. Then you could go nuts.
If everything goes perfectly.
Absolutely.
How often does everything go perfectly?
In nuclear, if you ignore, no, come on. If you ignore 1979 and 1986 and 2011, come on, we've had a good century. No, seriously, I mean, in terms of raw figures, coal mining, natural gas, more people die. I mean, it wasn't far from here a natural gas, pipe blew up and incinerated people. And so, it's important to keep in perspective that nuclear energy in terms of a overall safety record is better than other energy.
Okay, so we got 2 miracles down. You've got the carbon capture miracle, the nuclear miracle. You got 3 miracles to go.
Well, you can have a miracle having to do. Now, the rest of these energy sources are intermittent, low-density energy sources. So the only really dense, you take a plot of land, you can put a lot of energy, and you can put that anywhere in the world. That's hydrocarbons and nuclear. Those are energy factories. Everything else is energy farming, whether it's sun, wind, biofuel. And so the amount of land and the place that you can do it suitably, and in the case of wind and sun, the intermittency, creates a huge problem because society is very dependent on reliable power. Power is not one of these things where you say, oh, the hospital can't keep your heart monitor going, come back in a couple hours. It just, we are addicted to super reliable power. And there's a lot of weirdness about this. If you bring in intermittent sources, literally the price of power during the period wind is blowing could be as low as just the marginal cost for the natural gas for the peaker, and then all the price would be in the time when wind is not blowing. So reliable systems that require integration, those are much different economically than just coming in and being a 5% or 10% adder, particularly when you have artificial economics in terms of depreciation, production tax credit, and very artificial in terms of you bid your wind farm in right now. In many cases, if you don't deliver, you're not penalized for doing that.
This is not sounding very optimistic.
Well, okay, so the next 3 miracles, whether it's solar or biofuel or wind, and biofuel includes solar chemical, where you actually get away from the normal photosynthetic process and use other processes. All of them require storage and transmission. And so these are end miracles where you have to have an energy source that's extremely economic, and you have to have storage, and you have to have transmission.
Storage, you mean batteries?
Oh, it can be hydro, it can be, you can lift heavy objects up to the top of the mountain and roll them back down. It can be hot sodium.
But batteries would be the most efficient, wouldn't they?
No, not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
If you have the right geographic features. Another good energy author is David Mackay, spelled McKay, who's taken the UK. It's a brilliant book. It's kind of a must read because it actually explains to you, why do cars use energy? How could that change? Why do households use energy? How could that change? Why do planes use energy? How could that change? Takes and adds it up and then says, okay, given even very optimistic assumptions, here's how much energy we'll need, and here's the choices of how we get it. He has a chapter on hydro storage, and yes, there are places where you can do some hydro storage, but
You pump water up to the top of the mountain and then...
And that works perfectly. That's actually used in quite any place you have the right features that has actually good efficiency, low capital cost and good efficiency. Batteries today aren't in the same league. Now, Vinode's backing a lot of battery companies. I'm directly backing a lot of battery companies. Batteries and compressed air are interesting in that it's possible you could get, I even have a gravity storage company that I'm involved with, you could get numbers that are very, very good. And that would help a lot. Then intermittent storage can come in. But you have to add the cost of the batteries, or the equivalent of batteries, whatever the storage is, to whatever your cost of your intermittent
Well, you
sources.
say you have a gravity company that you're investing in, so that's lifting things up to then drop down at peak power.
It's basically gravel on ski lifts. So if you have a period of energy availability, you take the ski lift and you pour gravel on it.
Yeah.
And then if you have no energy, you take the gravel that's now at the top of the hill and you put it on the ski lift, and it actually does frequency regulation as well as energy generation. All these systems, they're pretty simple to characterize. They're capital cost and there's an efficiency level.
You passed over biofuels pretty quickly. Vinod was pretty excited before dinner about wood chips. Can wood chips get us there? Does that count as a miracle?
Well, it's up to the woodchucks. His ability to breed woodchucks is unbelievable. How did they come up with that? I don't know. Venture capital. No, he has a company, Kior, that uses a proprietary catalyst to deoxygenate these sources. Biomass sources don't look like hydrocarbon sources. They've got a lot of nitrogen and oxygen in them. So turning them into either energy or a liquid fuel is fairly difficult. And there are many, many ways to do it, as was said. None of them yet are that economic. Now, he's got some that are scaling up their pilot plants right now, and the numbers actually look pretty good.
But can you do it at a scale big enough to turn that global energy curve?
Basically, if your key interest is the price of gasoline, if biofuels can come in, not ethanol, because that was artificial in terms of how it was subsidized. But if you can get economic biofuels like his wood chip thing, and that can take even 10 or 15% of the gasoline market, if you combine that with some degree of electrification, say 10%, which say that's modest, and then efficiency, he has another company I love that has this really efficient motor, that there's multiple of those, but he has one of them. If you combine all those things and get, say, a 30 to 40% reduction in rich country use of liquid hydrocarbons, then you completely change the supply-demand economics. Yes, you have field depletion going on, but you also have innovation and drilling techniques taking place. So if things like that come together, the idea that you'd have a $100 barrel cost, you can probably get down to 50 or 60. If you get much below that, you do get a significant supply reduction at that point. So in the long run, because things like that I do think can get to 10%, and I think all those things can happen, I think the price of oil will tend to come down. I think the price of natural gas, for a variety of reasons, will tend to go up. Can you get above 10%? Okay, I'm willing to be surprised. If biofuels broadly, including wood chips, can get to 30 or 40% of liquid fuel supplies, I'll be very impressed by that. I think the logistics and cost make that hard, but that's what venture capital's all about. We basically, for every one of these 5 paths, we need at least 200 crazy people who think their idea alone can solve it.
You're not calling Vinod crazy.
No, he backs crazy people.
Oh, okay.
He is the paymaster of crazy people.
The paymaster of crazy.
Some of whom we will declare sane at some point in the future.
And you're saying we don't need all of these miracles.
No, absolutely.
One of them? A couple
of
them?
You've got transport. Transport is special, where either you have to have solar chemical work or it's hard because your individual point sources that are putting out CO2 aren't very much. So if you can't convert transport to electric and convert electric to zero CO2, if transport continues to be liquid fuels based, because you don't have the mobile battery miracle, which many people are working on, and some people think can be solved, some reasonable people don't think you can, then you need either biofuels that are made that are carbon neutral, or you need some sort of free air carbon capture. So there are companies that are also kind of crazy, including one I backed called Carbon Engineering, that literally does free air capture. That is, the wind blows by and it has this device.
Somebody in the room here who claims to have a car that does capture while it's driving down the road.
That's another possibility. The scale of a car as an energy plant, the percentage of capture you can do, it's extremely unlikely that economically you could do, say, 95% capture. It's likely to still be unless you've made the fuel in a carbon neutral way, it's unlikely you'll get full recapture.
do you put probabilities on each of these miracles, or you?
Yeah, it's pretty hard. I think for society's sake, we need to fund basic energy research at least twice as much as we do right now.
Well, so I was going to ask you, what needs to happen to make these things happen? Government research
things
is
like
obviously
that
one.
would increase the probabilities. And if you take the nuclear space, does the U.S. have the guts or the money or the will to actually go out and do new design demo plants? Probably not. I mean, when TerraPower was getting going, I went to the Secretary of Energy and I said, hey, how do you get this thing to be piloted in the U.S.? And he was very helpful. We work with national labs, great relationship, but the chance for a variety of reasons of the government funding such things, the regulator approving such things in the U.S. is very, very low. So that's a path that really depends on some country other than the U.S. to build the demo plant. A lot of the ideas, the invention, come from a tradition of fast reactor work here in the United States that's really brilliant, but it'll have to be a very international project.
More funding from the government, what else would help speed up the transition?
Well, some of these things like carbon capture, if you either have to put on a serious carbon tax, which is the most important thing to do, doesn't have to kick in immediately, but people have to believe that it will kick in a meaningful way during the life of power plants so that their power plant decisions are changed, and therefore the people who invent and supply power plants are incented to come up with low CO2 power plants. That's the greatest failure in our energy policy, is not to have out there, at least in the 10, 15-year time frame, a carbon tax that people really expect to happen.
And we're further from that today than we were 4 years ago.
Yes, that particular bill had some serious flaws in it in terms of how the system worked. But yes, the House did pass a bill, amazingly, hard to believe, that would have taken a meaningful step radically in that direction. Whether that's likely to happen or not is hard to say, but it's what should happen because it drives both conservation and innovation.
I want to open it up to questions in just a minute, but one other question, because we've spent a lot of time today before you got here talking about natural gas and the effect that natural gas has had on this whole equation. In your view, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? Is it delaying change or is it helping create a bridge to change?
Well, if you put aside climate change, which
that's a big thing to put aside.
This natural gas thing is phenomenal.
It's great.
And the upper bound on what might be out there in different layers, different drilling technologies, fracking technologies, it's quite amazing that there may be dramatically more than the proven reserves we have right now. So, and there's a lot of innovation that can take place there. So that's a very good thing. The price of electricity is very important. And it appears that shale gas is available in a lot of geographies around the world. In fact, the estimate for China is that, even though they haven't really gotten going on it, is actually higher than the United States. And so these are big, big numbers.
So go for gas and stop worrying about it.
Well, no, because unfortunately, even though natural gas has less CO2 emission per unit